All right, so this is another PatchAbilities that I'm working on. And as you saw yesterday, some patterns come in and they can be reversed. This one says Fusible Web Reversed Pattern Sheet. So if you're tracing to Fusible Web by hand, this would be the side you use. Now this is another one, die cutter friendly, not reversed pattern sheet. So this one would be the one we would have used to trace our pieces. So there we go, pieces like this. So when you get them on the fabric, then everything is reversed as Leah was showing you. So not the way we traced it at all. But when you put the picture together, that's the important part, is to have it reversed. So, this is my teacher's sample. So we're working on this pattern here. And to get all these gorgeous pieces to look like that, a couple more details. As Leah said, like, this is, applique is my thing. I love it more than anything. So you've got your fusible web, whatever you did. Someone else made these for me. I tend to use Wonder Under. This is not Wonder Under, but that's all right. I'm going to take a pin or back of the stiletto. I'll drag it through the paper and then tear from the middle out. You don't want to be picking paper at the edges. And I've taken the pattern sheet here, put it under my applique pressing sheet that Leah talked about, and I pin it in place so it doesn't shift on me. So Leah made mention that we have to work from the back of the picture to the front of the picture. So you gotta, if they're not numbered, and some patterns are numbered, you gotta take a look here. So obviously the pick me sign is way in the back behind everything. So the first thing I'm gonna need is the pick me stick, which is right here. So you would take your paper off, and then you lay this on the fusible sheet, right? And when it's a very involved piece like this, you start laying. And if you hit it just gently with the iron, it's like a tack in place. Then, at the end of the day, when you get it all pulled out, so what happens is we start getting these layers on, and then you can not really see what's going on underneath. So the reason I pin these up here, there's 2 pins there, one at each side, holding the pressing sheet on top of my pattern. I can lift this up and peek when it starts to get super involved and I can no longer see every single line that I might want to see. So we're soon going to lose some of our details. Now here's one of the curls, but it's not this curl. It's obviously a curl under there. It's going to go on top of the other pumpkin. So I'm going to put that down there. And I'm going to sneak a peek under there and see where it belongs. And I do believe, yeah, it comes around on top like that. So we have all the pieces kind of coming together here. When you're done, we'll give that a press, and then we can peel the whole thing off and put it on its backing, which is here. It's just a 6x9. But people used to try to build these designs on top of their backing, and after a while you couldn't see where anything went, and then pictures would kind of tilt and you wouldn't have a good seam allowance happening under there. Lots of weird things happened in the early days. When we get that all gently fused, we peel it off and then we'll iron it onto that backing. All right, so my job today is to walk you through some stitching. And I am actually going to take this pattern out of here. No, I'm going to use a different piece. We are going to do a little bit of stitching with a marker first. So we're going to blanket stitch today, and the important thing is when we're going around a design like this is that you keep the stitch perpendicular, the in bite of the blanket stitch. So when you're on a straight line like this, it's really easy. So perpendicular, if you remember, is that T. So wherever the edge is, you want this bar to come in nice and straight. So easy peasy on here, right? You'll come with your blanket stitch across and in and over and in and over and in. That's super easy on this. But on a curve like the side of the pumpkin, not as easy. So you have to do your stitch and come in, and you're going to do a lot of pivoting as you come in, because if you think this is a circle, think bicycle wheel, and all spokes come in, and if they create a pie if they joined in the middle. So oops, I'll make those just a little darker. So that's perpendicular to the edge, but not each other, right? So I'm going to do it in the machine for you as well, and then we're going to talk about the shapes, like this corner. When you're doing a buttonhole or a blanket stitch by hand, it's easy to space them out a little, not quite evenly, but better proportion in the piece, because you can adjust as you go when you go by hand. When you're doing it mechanically with your sewing machine, you have a little more thinking to do. And typically in a corner, when you go by hand, you're going to do one just before. I like to do one at an angle from the corner, and then another one, and I like them to join up in the corner like that. When you do mechanically, you might have to fudge it a little bit, and we're going to talk about that when I'm doing it actually for you. And when you get strange angles, then it's even going to be trickier. So I'm actually going to stitch for you today a little tiny thing with lots of different things going on, and hope that it makes sense to you what you can see. When you're stitching, there's a few feet. I like the Applique open toe in Bernie Land. It's number 20. Allows me to see where I'm going just a little easier. So what I want to work on is this. You know, when you're getting around a tight little corner like that, pivoting, when you go into a skinny little corner like that, try to get that stitch going out there. There's another good example right there. And see, each one of these has its own individual pivot point as you're going around. And you see they kind of get a little more like spokes on a wheel. I have red thread in, so I thought I might go around this little cardinal for you, or maybe this cardinal. When you're doing stitching applique, when you're fusing it, as Leah and I both mentioned, you have to start in the back. So, you know, this stem went down first, then this tree, then that, oops, that stem, that tree, that bird, maybe then that stem and that tree, and then final is the bird on the top. When you're stitching, you should also stitch in that manner. When I teach this classes, I always want you to be aware. I learned to applique before applique was even a thing. Before we had fusible webs, before we had stabilizer, before we had machines that had, you know, funky cool stitches, I was trying to applique. So this tree's been done and that tree's been done, so I can work on that bird happily and I can work on this bird happily. And I think I'll work on this one because he's kind of the most open there. So I'm going to load in sort of a darker red thread. Hopefully it helps you see it. When you're doing cross stitch on projects like this, you can match your thread, but if you want a very country feel to it, you put black thread in and that's all you use. So if you're someone who absolutely hates thread changes and the country look appeals to you, plain black thread all the way. All right, so now I'm going to do the bird with all my automatic things. Then I think I'll do the wing as if I don't have a fancy machine. So for those of you who are watching, if you have a fancy machine, these are all the things that you've got going on, and how they can be your friend. If you have automatic knots, which I do have programmed in my machine, sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. So in this machine, let me just see, I inadvertently always go to the wrong one. And I've got my automatic knot turned on, and in there, I don't like the one in place for some things. Right now I'm using the little line. So you have to know that I have 6 stitches, straight stitches, that have to go somewhere. So I'm going to help you and I'm going to show you how to hide them, okay? So when I just get started here, because blanket stitch is, there's nowhere to hide stuff. When I satin stitch, there's places you can hide some of it. Some machines call things different names. You might have the same choices as me, or you might have entirely different choices. It depends on the machine that you're using. We'll try to help you pick the best one. In class, when you're right in front of me, I can help you with your machine. But in satin stitch, I usually pull my bobbin thread to the top. And in this project, I'm using black bobbin thread. Oh, and I'm not using a stabilizer under here, which depending on your stitch you might want. But I'm stitching through batting, a layer of batting. I didn't like the tension when I was just on straight up cotton, and so I threw the batting in there, and I'll show you a project why in a second. Let's go to this one. So this one might have been the one I showed you what we were up to, but it's not because I finished it. Except for this crazy welcome up here. I'm still thinking about how to do that. But you see this white pumpkin here. When I flip this over, you can see there's no white pumpkin stitched through the batting. In this one, I used just this. It's usually heavy enough for blanket stitch. You can get away a lot of times without a stabilizer. If you're combining stitches though, you have to stabilize your project for the heaviest stitch. And so I would not have done this if I was using any satin stitching, but this is a completely blanket stitch project. So I threw the batting in there and then continued with the rest of it. And I used black bobbin thread because I was working on this pumpkin one. I was working on this tree one. I was working on this welcome sign and working on this table runner, which is fall themed as well. We have to do stuff so out of sync in retail. Like I ordered all my Christmas fabric last year before Halloween for this year. So I had a white pumpkin here and I had a white pumpkin on that other one. So why wouldn't I stitch both at the same time? So eliminate some thread changes. I was doing this one. Then, as I said, I went and I did this pumpkin and I didn't like how the tension was sitting and how it was feeling. So I thought, I'm just going to put the batting on it. Sometimes I do them all in. PatchAbilities, Julie, she's a friend of mine, and so's her mom, who owns a quilt store. And sometimes they build the samples to a certain stage, and I buy them that way, and then I finish them. So I didn't have to do all the work, which is great. All right, so I'm going to do this bird here. I'm going to give you a couple things that you need to know. So if I start here, I can go all the way around the bird till I get to the wing. And then I can actually carry on around the wing. And that will give me one start and one stop in this bird. So let's do this bird my typical way. And with the auto settings and stuff, and then I'll do the other bird for you, kind of more old school. All right, so remember, I need to start at the edge of the wing so I can go around the bird, then around the wing, and then done. So I have that setting of the stitch in the knotting pre-programmed. So I know it's going to do this little tie-off knot. So I've got my needle right in where the bird meets the wing meets the bird, the edge there. Just going to snook it over just a smidge. And we're going to let that do that. Start the stitching. So keeping the line and the stitch perpendicular to each other. So when I come forward here, I'm not going to be perpendicular anymore. So I'm going to pivot just a wee bit and get to the next one and pivot a wee bit. Next one. Each stitch in something this little is a decision. All right, I know from experience that coming to the tip, I'm going to miss the tip. I'm not going to get all the way there. So I'm not quite to the tip there. I'm going to take that stitch and it goes all the way across the end of the tail, back. Then I'm going to turn this a little bit and I'm going to hope for that stitch to come up to the tip of the tail. And then I'm going to pivot this and I'm going to try to knock this next stitch straight down from the tip of the tail, or pretty close. And so that's a bit like the one I drew you. Maybe not perfect, but everyone's watching me and there's a tripod in my way. So pretty good, I'll be pretty good here. So There's other rules to when and where and how to pivot, but when you're using decorative stitches, you have to complete the stitch and get to somewhere sensible for the pivot. You have to complete the stitch. When you're doing blanket stitch, the pivot is always when you're on the outside. I didn't like that stitch, but can't fix it. So, without unpicking, and I'm not gonna. Because in the overall, if I didn't tell you I didn't like that stitch, you might never know. So we're just gonna blanket and see that curve. When the curve is too short, you want to give yourself a little more area to sew towards. And then you'll know how you want to pivot by whether there's room for you to sew and what the edge looks like next to the needle, if that's your pivot point. We'll just keep going around and think bicycle wheel. All spokes meet in the middle. So when you're on a curve, that's what you're thinking. Essentially, where would that go if this was a wheel? A bicycle wheel. Leah would like that bicycle wheel. That girl's crazy about her bike. It's awesome. All right, I'm going to go back here and cut that tail. Or if it's still possible, you can flip to the back here. And I can grab the black tail from the beginning. And sometimes you can pull the red one to the back. It's a little stuck right now, so I'm just going to trim it because it's in my way. And I had that beautiful tie off from earlier, so I'm not too worried. So remember, perpendicular to the edge, each stitch in something this small is a decision. And all pivoting is done on the outside edge. Oh, now I'm getting to a curve. So I think I'm okay for one more there. But here, you can see if I went now, it would be straight across that tail and a bit weird. Bobbin weight thread is 60, 80, 100 weight thread. It's finer than the thread on top. It's good in decorative stitches where you don't have anything showing on the back. All right, so here's one of those corners I was talking about. I'm going to try to tip you guys up. So where am I going to put the point? I want to do a 90 degree or 45 out of the tip of that tail. So I'm going to turn it and go again. And then I've got the 3 stitches all sort of interconnecting there. I'll show you close up when we're done. And then I'm going to have almost a similar thing here. When are using decorative stitches, the tension isn't always this same as sewing. Lots of times the color would show on the back. You want no bobbin thread to show on the front. And so we use 2 different weight threads, which creates a little tension war that's going to make things actually prettier. And when you do a machine embroidery, the same is involved. Okay, which way do I want that stitch and that point? Oh, look, I'm coming up on that little wing. Hopefully I haven't bored you all to tears. Okay, so I'm also tip you up a little bit. There's actually not enough room in here for a stitch from the body to the wing for a full blanket stitch, and it's going to travel forward. So on here, this is the width, so that blanket stitch is 2.3 wide, but the traveling back and forth, the length is 2.6, and I know I don't have 2.6 millimeters from the needle to the edge of that wing. So there's a couple things you could do. Depends how fussy you are. You can move ahead and it'll hide in the overall. It'll stitch into the wing, but it'll hide. No one will see it. I could switch right now to a straight stitch and take a straight stitch there, or I could do my little cheat, which is I'm going to lift the needle and then I am going to shift my fabric a little bit so that stitch lands in that hole. What I did was I faked the machine out. I didn't let it travel the full 2.6 by lifting the foot and pushing the fabric. So I landed right in that crack where the bird lands. The bird meets wing. So now I'm at the wing. I've done the bird and I'm going to go around the wing because there's a smarter way to do all of this. Oh, again, into the point of that wing. And you know, you guys, I get really lucky. Some people say, wow, you're so good. You got those points just exactly right. No, I get really lucky. I don't know what it is, but I get really lucky. Okay, so into the tip. Then I'm going to come around. And you know, some stuff, I like to do stuff fast, absolutely. But sometimes it's worth the effort to go a little slower, because I don't want to unpick this. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can really see the difference. Let me just turn that again just a hair between the wing and the body. It's so subtle. It's really difficult. Old age. You know, just a tip. Okay, I've got my water soluble marker here. If you cannot see these lines, you can use a marker when you have red on red or green on green or anything. So to emphasize where I'm actually stitching, I could go in here and I could trace around that wing. See, now it's so much darker. I know exactly where I'm sewing. This getting old is for the birds. My particular eyesight dilemmas cannot be fixed by surgery, so it's just me and tricks. So I traced that line out. Now I can really see where the edge of that wing is because it's red on wet red. A little difficult. But now I know where to place the stitches and it's less aggravating. For every problem you have working on this stuff, there is a solution. Ooh, see? And got lucky. And I'm ending where the wing meets the bird by 1 millimeter. So, a couple things I can do right now. I'm going to hit my scissors, and my scissors are tied to an automatic tie off. So I'm going to do that. So all of you guys who are keeping your eyes peeled, this is how my machine works. Yours might be a little different, but mine's going to do that straight 6 stitches forward. And I hid them. Okay, so this is where I drew with that marker, and it will come out, so I'm not too worried. Then when I stopped, my needle was just shy of this corner, and I hit the scissors, and then it did the tie off, and it hid here in the seam where the wing meets the background. So nice and easy. And then the start point was up here, remember, because we started here, went round the bird, got here, then went round the, oh, I went this way around the wing. Now I am not going to use all of the fancy things on my machine. So if you have a machine that doesn't have all those fancy things, this is how things will work for you. So got my blanket stitch loaded, but I want to switch. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get a straight stitch, and I'm going to turn that straight stitch down to 1.5, let's say. Yeah, right about there. Come on, 1.5. There we go. And I'm going to show you how you would do this in a machine that might not have all those fancy knots, or might not have a knot that you like. So bird with wing. So, and if I'm going to have that same I'm so old issue, right now would be the time to go in and put a mark. Trace that wing so there's a dark line around the edge so I can see it much better. Then I want to start here and go this way towards the bird's peak. But with the straight stitch, I want to hide that. So what I'm going to do first, actually, is I'm going to start up here and sew towards the wing. So I'm going to just sew in the seam there to where I want to start with my blanket stitch. And that's where the wing and the bird meet. You see where I started with that thread? And I sewed to where I want to start. So that now when I go in and switch to my little blanket stitch, it's going to land on top of those. So I'm kind of back stitching. And this kind of back stitch is a treadle back stitch. They didn't have back stitching. So what you would do on a seam, you know, normally we start, say here, and then we go back to the edge and then forward. On a treadle, you would start here, sew to this corner, turn the thing around, and then sew that way. And that was the back stitch. So I sewed from where I wanted a back stitch to be to where I wanted to start. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Ooh. Not gonna land on that tail the way I want to. Well, maybe. Sometimes you're just gonna fake it so it looks right. Remember, in something so small, almost every stitch could be a decision. And details matter. You can turn a single repeat on so that you can't over sew. Okay, in and out of that little neck point. Give yourself some area to change. And sometimes these are minute little twists, and this is why I love my knee lift. If you have not cottoned on to using your knee lift, applique and pivoting is where you learn how important it could be. So if I let that go in now, it wouldn't be nice. That's more perpendicular. Sometimes you can squeak a couple stitches out depending how long the run of edge is there. That one could have been a little better, but you know. What happens in my sewing room stays in my sewing room, right? Okay, and then I'm gonna do straight across the tail there. Okay, so this one's not going to quite work out the way that I like. And what's going to happen, let me point with my little stiletto. I know that from here to here is a little longer than the stitch. So I'm going to move forward and show you what I would do to fake that out. It's pretty close. It's a thread off, but I'm going to just pretend it isn't. So I would have liked to have landed right there, but I landed back here. So what I've done is I've turned this so that when this blanket stitch goes, I've put that bar into the edge. It's hidden. And then I'm going to take half a stitch, adjust my little birdie tail to where I want to end the stitch, and stitch in, and then go around the corner as if nothing happened. Wow, that's a mighty zoom. Hopefully it's not making you guys nauseous. Okay, so a bit of a curve, a little there, a bit more of a curve. And then when we're done here, I'll pull it out and I'll do a bit of a play-by-play on the decision I made on each stitch. We don't have instant replay. I haven't quite got that much technical video skill happening. Okay, so I made it, luckily, back to the wing because horseshoes. So, all right, let's get around this little wing. Hopefully some other decisions have to happen. And like, see, this is another one. I'm so close to the end. I can place a stitch here. Perpendicular is going to go right across the tail or the tip of the wing. See, side to side, back. Then I'm going to travel here, and with that zoom you should see I've kind of just snuck past the edge of the fabric just by a hair, but the thread's going to kind of hide that. And then into the tip, and then I'm going to just come down that edge there. Because this stitch is going to form here, and the next stitch is going to end right where this one starts. So that stitch there, and then see, look, I'm right in there at the butt end of that stitch. I didn't have to fake that stitch either. So if I didn't have my fancy machine, because remember this bird was the not fancy bird, I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to go out of there, back into my straight stitch. And now I'm at the beginning of where I started. And I can do a straight stitch anywhere that will hide. So sometimes they're a little thick going forward, like on next to the red and the white there. So I could straight stitch forward here and cut it off. I could straight stitch in here, or I'm going to turn my bird full round, and I'm going to go back in here, red on red with the red thread. It's going to hide a little better that tie off. So I'm down at like a 1.5 here. I might even, you can go 1.5. I'm going to do a 1. And I'm just going to straight stitch, not using any fancy things like, oops, scissors. See that moved over? I forgot the blanket stitch starts. Not dead center like the straight stitch does. Normally I move my needle position for that straight stitch to match wherever the blanket stitch starts and finishes. But this is the not fancy version. So now I'm going to just do those little teeny tiny stitches. I don't know, half dozen of them or so. And assuming there's no knots on this machine, no fancy knots, I'm going to lift this, pull it out, cut those tails. So there's the beginning. There's the end. I'm going to flip this little birdie over. I'm going to grab the bobbin thread, and I'm going to yoink up on it a little bit here. And hopefully you can see that suddenly there's a little red dot there. And I'm going to pull those loops to the back to cut them off. Oh, that one might be harder to do. It's embedded in a bit. So I'll make a couple weird stitches for you guys. So I'm going to go back into the blanket, and I'm going to draw on here in the cutaway batting. This up here is going to get thrown in the garbage after. So I'm going to make applique edge, and I'm going to make a really narrow point Doesn't look so narrow on the screen, but it is. Then I'm going to blanket stitch for you guys. So we'll just do our little blanket stitch in and out, in and out. And you can see now I'm hitting to the middle there. Okay, so now I'm all the way to that edge. So then I'm going to go here. Maybe take one more stitch. And then if I take the bar, it's going to be messy. So you can maybe tip it and go a little bit. You can take a narrower bar, or oops, sorry. What I did in the other one, when there was no room for a stitch, I turned this completely sideways, and then I let the what would have been the insy bar go as the side bar here, and then you can travel forward in the edge there. So now I'm at the tip, and then I can put that stitch into the tip, and then I'm going to turn this. Let me adjust the stuff. Okay, so again, we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to do the stitch forward, and if you think that the bar across is going to go too far, then you rotate your piece and bury the bar on the side. See that? So it's hiding in the seam allowance, more or less. And then you carry on as if nothing happened. And then it doesn't get all weird at the end there. So let's cut that with those fancy scissors. And to tell you guys the truth, I have one of the fanciest machines in the universe, but I don't use all the fancy stuff all the time because they aren't helpful in my particular projects. So it's a little messy because the batting's soft, but you see I buried that crossbar. I buried one of them right there instead of letting it go all the way across here, making a mess from here to out here. Then I did the tip and I did a bar down in. Then when I turned, I buried the other bar in the side and then carried on to where they didn't interfere. And when you're not because this is my finger in here, you guys, so you can see that's hugely magnified. On a piece, a real piece, you're not really going to see those things. So let's see. See, you can hardly see the stitches in the tips here. But this is how I like for a corner to turn out when possible, right? All three of these stitches kind of meeting here. And if you did them by hand, you would do that. But you'd be able to adjust this spacing impromptu. You wouldn't have to worry about it. But I'm trying to make this look like really nice hand stitching while doing it programmed. And so see, perpendicular to this edge, and maybe see, this is one I said, ooh, I'm not sure I like that one. It could have ended over here, just a couple millimeters. But in the overall, no one sees that. No one notices it. We only see it and notice it because I've said. So let's turn it over. That'll help. And see, so by using bobbin thread, you get this bobbin. Sometimes you get the front coming to the back, which is fine because you don't want that ugly black to come to the front. But I think that's part and parcel of them running out of bobbin thread, and it might be getting a bit weird and tight down there. But you can see how that tip went. There we go, you guys. That was like a compulsive person's version of applique. So I hope you enjoyed that. And that's sort of my version to a better blanket stitch on your machine. Both the fancy way, fancy machine, and both Then the second way, no pre-programmed knots, no program cutting. When I pulled those tails to the back on the one bird, we did that back stitch, so we don't have to tie a knot. We use the straight stitch, we use our machine, we use 2 different stitches, because these days some of the less expensive machines, they still have blanket stitch. When I bought my first machine with blanket stitch, you know, whatever, 20 years ago, the you could only get it on top of the line machines. Hopefully my crazy compulsive little tendencies and tips might make your day a little better, might have helped you decide some of those things for some people are not worth it, and it's okay. There are no quilt police, there are no stitch police, and honestly, if someone has an opinion about how you're stitching, you had better just submit your work to be judged, and if you didn't, they get to bugger off. Thanks for joining me. I hope that was everything you hoped it could be, and it was useful for you. Let's continue to be kind, be calm, be safe, and be grateful we can isolate. I love this picture. I'm so excited. That was so lovely. And look, Mouse must have heard the video was ending and he came for his pets. Thanks so much, you guys. We'll see you tomorrow for the wrap. You have something to say to the people? He loves the sign too. He loves it. I gotta go find somewhere nice to hang that now. So enjoy my mouse purse. I'm gonna go, I think, oh, I'm having my bubble family over for a barbecue. I have to go to the grocery store. Talk to you later.